Before I tell you what happened on that plane, I need you to do something for me. I need you to stop whatever you are doing right now and stay right here, because what you are about to hear is the kind of story that does not let you go once it starts. A man raised his hand and slapped a woman across the face inside a private jet, in front of a full cabin of people, at 30,000 feet in the air. He did it with a smirk on his face. He did it like he had done it before. He did it like there was absolutely nobody on that plane who could stop him or make him answer for it. And he was wrong. Because sitting 12 feet away, on the other side of a curtain, was a man whose name makes entire boardrooms go silent. A man who had built an empire in spaces most people do not even know exist. A man who set down his glass of water, stood up slowly, and stepped through that curtain, not with rage, not with noise, but with the specific, terrifying calm of someone who has already decided exactly what is going to happen next. What that man did not say in that moment, and what the person who threw that slap did not yet know, was that the woman sitting in that seat with her hand pressed to her burning cheek was his wife. This is her story. Every twist, every reveal, every moment of justice that was a long time coming. I promise you, by the time we reach the end, your jaw will be on the floor. So do not go anywhere. And before we get into it, drop your location in the comments right now. Tell me your city, your country, what time it is where you are. I read every single one, and I love knowing where my viewers are watching from around the world. If you are not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Now let us get into it. I remember the exact way the light looked inside that jet. It was the kind of soft, golden light that makes everything feel expensive. Cream leather seats, polished wood panels, and little round windows showing nothing but white cloud. I was sitting in business class, back straight, hands folded, trying to take up as little space as possible. That had become a habit of mine over the past 3 years, taking up less space, breathing quietly, smiling at the right moments. The flight was a private charter organized by the Choi family, my husband Jinsu's family, for their annual corporate retreat to Jeju Island. I was not there as a wife, officially. I was listed on the manifest as a legal consultant. That had been my role for so long that sometimes I forgot I was anything else. Jinsu was seated 3 rows ahead of me, deep in conversation with a senior board member. He had not looked back at me once since we boarded. That was normal. Everything about my marriage to Jinsu was practiced and careful and normal on the surface. The way a painting hung slightly crooked on a wall is normal. You stop noticing after a while. His younger brother, Ryan, was seated directly across the aisle from me. Ryan was 29, loud, and had been working through the drinks cart since before takeoff. He had his father's jaw and his mother's eyes and absolutely nobody's manners. For 40 minutes he had been talking. At me, not to me. Comments about my clothes, a joke about my accent, a remark about how it was generous of the family to include their legal help on a private flight. I kept my face smooth. I had learned to do that too. Then Ryan leaned across the aisle, and his open hand came across my cheek so fast I did not see it coming. I only heard it, that sharp, ugly crack cutting through the hum of the engines, bouncing off every wall of that small cabin. My head turned with the impact. My hand went to my face. The cabin went completely silent. And then, without meaning to, my eyes moved to the curtain at the front of the plane. The curtain that separated business class from first. I stared at it. It had not moved, but I knew with every nerve in my body that the man behind it had heard every single thing. The curtain moved. It did not swing open dramatically. It shifted slowly, the way a curtain moves when someone pulls it back with one hand, unhurried, like they have all the time in the world. And then he stepped through. His name was Kang Min-jun. He was wearing a dark suit with no tie, holding a glass of water loosely at his side, and he moved through the cabin the way water moves, everything parting around him without any contact. He was not rushing. He did not look like a man who had ever rushed toward anything in his life. I watched the faces of the passengers who recognized him. A board member near the window went very still. The flight attendant who had gasped when Ryan hit me took one small step backward. Ryan himself was still smirking, not yet understanding that the temperature in the cabin had changed completely. Min-jun stopped a few feet from where I was sitting. He looked at me first, not at Ryan, not at the cabin, at me. His eyes moved to my cheek, where I could still feel the heat sitting under my skin, and something shifted behind his expression. Not anger, something colder and more deliberate than anger. "Are you hurt?" he said. His voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that fills a room. I shook my head once. He held my eyes for a moment to make sure. Then he turned and looked at Ryan for the first time. Ryan had stopped smirking. He was looking at the suit, at the way the other passengers had gone rigid, at the two men who had appeared silently at both ends of the cabin, and he was doing the math slowly and badly. "Who are you?" Ryan said. He tried to make it sound casual. It did not. Min Jun considered the question like he found it mildly interesting. "Someone considerably more inconvenient than you are prepared for," he said. Then he turned, walked back through the curtain, and let it fall closed behind him. Ryan laughed nervously. Nobody else did. I sat with my hand, still pressed to my cheek, and understood, for the first time since the plane lifted off, that this night was not going to end the way Ryan thought it would. Let me tell you how a woman like me ends up on a private jet belonging to a family that does not respect her, married to a man who does not see her, sitting 40 rows away from the most powerful and quietly terrifying man she has ever known. My name is Sira. I am 31 years old. My father is Nigerian. My mother is Korean. I grew up between Lagos and Seoul, speaking 3 languages before I was 10, and I became a lawyer because I was very good at seeing the exact place where something was wrong. I had been doing it since I was a child. I could walk into a room and find the loose thread in under 2 minutes. I met Min Jun 18 months ago. He walked into my law firm, not a flashy entrance, not an assistant calling ahead. He simply appeared in the waiting area one morning in that same dark suit, asked for me by name, and told the receptionist he did not have an appointment but that he was happy to wait. He was there about a land rights case. A community in Southeast Asia had been pushed off their property by a development company that had 17 lawyers and a very clean paper trail. He wanted someone to find where the paper trail went crooked. He said he had been told I was good at that. I was. We worked on that case for 4 months, side by side late into the evenings across a table covered in documents. He asked real questions. He listened to the answers like they mattered. He never once made me feel like I was in the wrong room. He proposed on a Tuesday. Bad coffee. A ring he had been carrying for 6 weeks. He told me exactly what his world involved, the danger, the people who disliked him, the weight that came with standing beside him. He said I could walk away, and he would understand it without bitterness. I did not walk away. We married privately, 3 witnesses, a small registry office in Seoul, no announcement. His world was not yet safe enough for public knowledge of me. That was our agreement. He was working to change that. Until then, I was Sira the consultant, and he was a name behind a curtain, and we were building something real inside a secret. A plane landed at Jeju in the late afternoon. The light was orange and wide over the water. The Choi family moved through the arrivals hall like they owned the ground under their feet, which in some technical sense they did. The resort we were headed to sat on land the family had purchased 15 years ago. I understood the full shape of things now. The Choi family co-owned their corporation with Min Jun's family, the Kangs, through a business merger that was now in its final stages. The Kangs held the majority stake. Ryan was Jinsu's younger brother, useless and expensive, surviving on family money. Jinsu himself was quiet, handsome, and frightened of his own shadow, or more precisely of his mother, Madame Choi, who ran the family with a kind of calm, total authority that made people forget she was doing it. None of them knew Min Jun was my husband. They believed I was a legal consultant hired for the trip, a piece of support staff with good shoes. I had watched Madame Choi from a careful distance on the flight and now in the arrivals hall. She was a small woman in a cream blazer who moved with extraordinary precision, and I noticed, with the specific attention I brought to everything, that she had looked at me 3 times already. Not the way someone looks at staff. The way someone looks at a problem they have not yet fully diagnosed. The welcome dinner was held in a private dining room at the resort, a long rectangular space with floor-to-ceiling glass on one side and the ocean sitting dark and wide beyond it. 40 people, round tables, the kind of flowers that cost more than most people's rent. Madame Choi made her move before the soup arrived. I found my place card and went to my seat. Then I looked at the table number. I had been placed at a side table near the serving station, not quite with the staff, but close enough to make the message clear. I stood there for 3 seconds. Then I picked up my place card, walked to the main table, found an empty seat beside a junior board member, and set my card down. The junior board member looked at me. I smiled. He smiled back. Madame Choi noticed from across the room. I could feel it. When she spoke a few minutes later, her voice carried that specific kind of gentleness that has a blade inside it. "Some people simply do not understand the room they are in," she said to the woman beside her. Laughter moved around her end of the table. I looked at her directly and did not look away. I just smiled, slowly, steadily, the smile of a woman who knows something the other person does not yet know she knows. Later, as the main course was being cleared, I watched Madame Choi lean toward Jinsu and whisper something close to his ear. His face changed. The color left it gradually, like water draining from a glass. He nodded twice without looking up. I filed that away, the way I filed everything, and carried it carefully back to my suite. Jinsu was waiting in the corridor outside my suite when I returned. He looked like a man who had been standing there for a while, working up to something. He told me his mother had run a background check on every consultant assigned to the trip. Standard procedure, he said. His hands were doing something uncomfortable at his sides. He said the check had turned up an anomaly, a legal name change, 18 months ago. My name, before I took Minjun's family name for private legal documents, matched a record that did not fully align with my current professional identity. He asked me, quietly, if there was anything about my situation that could complicate the summit. I looked at him for a long moment. Jinsu was not a bad man. He was simply a man who had chosen comfort over courage so many times that he had forgotten there was a difference. "The only complication on this trip," I said, "came through your family's front door." I went inside and closed the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed and called Minjun. He answered before the second ring. "I know," he said before I had spoken a word. His voice was even, calm, the way it always was when the situation was anything but. "How much does she know?" I asked, a pause just long enough to tell me something. "Less than she thinks," he said, "but more than I would like. There is a private investigator on the island. He arrived yesterday." I exhaled slowly. "What do you need me to do?" "Nothing yet." "Stay calm, show up tomorrow like you own the ground you are standing on." I almost laughed. "I will try." "Sira," his voice shifted slightly. "You already do." I sat with that for a moment after he hung up. Then I opened my laptop, because I was a lawyer and staying calm did not mean staying still, and I began pulling the Choi family's corporate filings up on my screen. 3 hours later, my coffee had gone cold, and I had found something that made me stop breathing for a full 3 seconds. The Choi Corporation had been moving assets for 14 months, not publicly, not in any way that would show up in a standard financial review. They were using shell companies, a chain of them, layered and named in ways designed to make the structure look complicated without looking suspicious. I recognized the pattern immediately. I had seen it before, in a fraud case I had prosecuted 2 years earlier. The architecture was almost identical. The shell companies were offloading assets, while the public-facing accounts showed healthy growth. The Kang family were in the final stages of approving a merger based on those public-facing numbers. They were about to hand over a significant amount of money and trust to a company that was, underneath its clean surface, quietly being emptied. I kept reading. I cross-referenced the company registration documents. I pulled the director listings for each shell company one by one. Most of the names were strangers. Then I found one I recognized. Ryan's name. Right there, on the registration documents for the third shell company in the chain. His signature, dated 11 months ago. His personal identification number used as the registering director. Ryan, who everyone treated as a useless younger son with a drinking problem and a bad attitude, had his name on a financial fraud structure that reached all the way into the final stage of a 9-figure merger. I saved every document. I encrypted the folder. Then I sat back in my chair and looked at the ceiling for a long time. I thought about that hand across my face on the plane. I thought about the way Ryan had laughed afterward. And I thought about the fact that he had slapped the one person on this island who was going to dismantle everything he had spent 11 months building. He had no idea. I did not sleep. By morning, I had a complete picture, not every detail, but enough. The shell company structure was designed to bleed value from the Choi Corporation's real estate portfolio over 18 months, redirecting it through intermediary accounts that would be untraceable once the merger closed. The merger itself was the smokescreen. Once signed, the Kang family would inherit a corporation with a fraction of the declared value. And by the time anyone found the discrepancy, The money would be several layers deep in accounts that did not officially exist. It was not a small fraud. It was patient, detailed, and it required someone with serious financial knowledge and access to internal Choi records to execute it. Ryan did not have that kind of mind. Someone had built this for him, or with him, or possibly around him without him fully understanding what he was part of. I was still turning that over when a knock came at my suite door. Ryan. He was not drunk this time. His eyes were clear and calculating, and that was considerably more dangerous than drunk Ryan. He leaned against the doorframe and told me, with a pleasant smile, that he knew I was more than a consultant. He said he had seen me speaking privately with Min-jun on the plane. He said he was willing to make the trip comfortable for me if I could tell him what Min-jun's team was bringing to the summit table. He wanted information. He was asking me to spy. I looked at him standing there in his expensive shirt, confident in the way that people are confident when they have never once faced a real consequence. "The last person who asked me to compromise a client's position," I said, "is currently serving 7 years in federal prison." I paused. "Have a good morning." I closed the door. My phone buzzed 10 seconds later. Unknown number. A photograph, me and Min-jun in a market in Seoul, 18 months ago, his hand at my back, both of us caught in a completely unguarded moment. Below the photograph, one sentence: "Leave the island by noon or this goes to every board member at the summit." I forwarded it to Min-jun without a single word. His reply came in 4 seconds: "Do not leave. I need you at that summit." I stared at those words. Then I got dressed, put on my sharpest suit, and went downstairs for breakfast. I spotted the private investigator at the breakfast buffet. He was trying to look like a guest, dressed casually, reading a newspaper, sitting at a small table near the window with a view of the main entrance. He was good. Most people would not have noticed anything, but I had seen him before. His name was Beek. He had worked on the opposing side of a corporate case I handled 2 years ago, not a dishonest man, but a practical one. A man who worked for whoever was paying and asked very few questions about why. I did not approach him. I ate my breakfast and noted every detail: the newspaper he was reading, the phone face down beside his coffee cup, the angle of his chair, which was pointed toward the main corridor rather than the ocean view. He was not watching for guests. He was watching for a specific person. Me, most likely, or Min-jun, possibly both. I went back to my suite, pulled out my notes, and added his name to the file I was building. Then I thought about what it meant that Beek was here, that Madam Choi, or whoever had hired him, had sent a pie to the island before the summit even began. This was not a reaction to something I had done. This had been arranged in advance, which meant that someone on this island had known about me, about my connection to Min-jun, before the trip was organized. I opened my laptop and made one very specific search. The results took 11 minutes to load. When they did, I read through them twice, closed my eyes, and understood something I should have seen 3 days ago. The fraud structure I had found in the Choi filings was not the whole picture. It was the surface layer. And the thing underneath it was bigger, colder, and reached into a place I had not expected. The summit opened the following morning in the resort's main conference room, a long, light-filled space with glass walls facing the ocean and a table large enough for 20 people. Min-jun's team sat on one side, the Choi family on the other. I was seated along the wall, behind the Kang team, holding a notepad and looking, to anyone who glanced at me, like exactly what they thought I was. I watched Madam Choi present. She was extraordinary at it, steady, warm, completely in control of every sentence. The figures she walked through were polished and convincing, and if I had not spent the previous 2 nights reading the real numbers underneath them, I might have been impressed. Min-jun's team listened without interruption. I watched their faces and saw nothing: good lawyers, well-trained, giving nothing away. The lead Choi attorney placed the merger valuation document on the table in front of the Kang team. I already knew which page to watch. I had memorized the number that was wrong, not wrong enough to be obvious, but wrong in the specific way that only matters if you know where to look. It was in the 3rd column of the asset summary on page 41, a single figure that did not match the underlying property records I had found in the filing database the night before. When the document landed, I watched Min-jun's chief counsel flip to page 41. I picked up my pen. I wrote the correct figure on the corner of my notepad, tore it off, and passed it down the row. It reached the chief counsel. He read it. His pen stopped moving mid-sentence. He turned the note over, read it again, then leaned slightly to his right and placed it in front of Min-jun. Min-jun read the number. He did not look up immediately. He kept his eyes on the document in front of him, and from where I was sitting, I watched his face do the thing I had learned to recognize. It went very still, the way still water goes still when the wind drops completely. Not empty, focused. He let the presentation continue for exactly 6 more minutes. Then he set his pen down and said pleasantly that he would appreciate a short recess before they moved to the valuation discussion. Madame Choi agreed immediately, reading it as nerves on the Kang side, which was exactly what she was meant to read. The room cleared. In the corridor, Min-jun stopped and turned to me. "How long have you known?" he said. "Since 2 nights ago," I said. "The valuation figure was the door. The shell company structure was everything behind it." He was quiet for a moment. "You didn't sleep." "No, neither did I," he straightened slightly. "You found it before my team did. Your team was looking at the top. I started from the bottom." He nodded once. Then quietly, so only I could hear, "There is someone on my side of the table who I think has been feeding them information. I have not yet confirmed it." Before I could respond, his counsel appeared in the doorway. Min-jun held my eyes for 1 more second. Then he walked into the room. I stayed in the corridor and ran through every face at the Kang table and stopped at one. The man who had been in the room longest. The man Min-jun trusted most. I already knew the name before Min-jun said it to me that evening. Madame Choi found me alone in the corridor during the recess. She came without her son, without Ryan, without any of the performance of warmth she wore in public. She stood close enough that no one passing could overhear and told me she knew about the marriage. She said the certificate had been found, partially, an incomplete record, but enough. She said she had a legal argument prepared that the marriage was invalid. She delivered all of this pleasantly, the way someone delivers bad news they have been looking forward to delivering. "You have been preparing that argument for weeks," I said. She did not deny it. "Which means you found the certificate before this trip was arranged. You did not run the background check to protect the summit. You ran it to find a reason to remove me from Min-jun's life before I could look at your company's books." The warmth left her face entirely. "The problem," I said, "is that the check led you to me, and I led myself straight to your filings." A sound behind her. Jinsu was standing 10 feet away. He had heard enough. He looked at his mother. "Is the company in trouble?" he asked. His voice was flat and careful. She said, "This is not the place." He asked again. She walked away. He turned to me and said very quietly that if there was a way to stop this without destroying everything, he wanted to find it. "Then stop protecting people who do not deserve it," I said. He reached into his jacket pocket and held out a small USB drive. I plugged the drive into my laptop that evening with the curtains drawn and the door locked. The files were internal communications, messages between Ryan and the private investigator Beak, going back 11 months, meeting records, payment transfers, instructions, and threaded through all of it, the detailed back and forth between Ryan and the lead director of the shell company network. Ryan had not simply participated in the fraud. He had built the architecture of it, piece by piece, using his mother's corporate access and his brother's executive credentials, feeding Madame Choi only the information she needed to stay cooperative, and none of the information that would have made her refuse. Madame Choi was not the mastermind. She was a woman who had been managed by her own son, given just enough truth to feel in control while the real decisions happened around her. I sat back and felt something complicated move through me. Not sympathy exactly. She had still stood in that corridor and tried to dismantle my marriage with a cold smile. But a different kind of understanding. The villain I had been preparing to face had a villain of his own operating inside him. I called Min-jun. I told him what was on the drive. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for long enough that I checked the line was still connected. "There is one more layer," he said. "The shell company director, the name on those registrations. He has been receiving information about my family's asset positions for 3 years." A pause. "From someone inside my own team." I already knew. "Director Han," I said. Silence on the line. Then, "Yes." I thought about Director Han, quiet, serious, the kind of man who fades into the background of a room so completely that you stop seeing him even when he is there. One of the 3 people who witnessed our wedding. A man Min-jun had trusted since he was 19 years old. "What do you need from me?" I asked. He said, I need you to be formally introduced at tomorrow's session as my wife." I did not sleep again. I spent the night organizing everything: the shell company documents, Jinsu's drive, the valuation discrepancy, the payment records, the timeline I had built across the past 3 days, into a presentation that a 10-year-old could follow. Clear, sequenced, impossible to dismiss. I had done this before in courtrooms. The principle was the same: you do not shout. You place the evidence in front of people and let it speak at full volume. By 4 in the morning, I had printed everything, separated it into labeled sections, and placed it in a single folder. I made tea. I sat by the window. The ocean outside was dark and wide and completely still. I thought about my mother, who had taught me that the quietest voice in a room is often the one saying the most important thing. I thought about Ryan's hand across my face on the plane. The way the cabin had gone silent. The way I had looked at that curtain and known that the man behind it was already deciding something. I thought about the version of me that had spent years becoming smaller and quieter and more careful. That woman had boarded this plane. She was not the woman who would walk into that conference room in a few hours. At 5:30, Minjun texted. One line, "How are you?" I replied, "Ready." His reply came immediately, "I know." I smiled at my phone in the dark. Then I got up, got dressed, and went to face the morning. The conference room filled slowly. The Choi side arrived first, Madam Choi perfectly composed, Ryan relaxed and scrolling his phone, 2 senior attorneys arranging documents. Then Minjun's team, filing in, taking their seats. Director Han at his usual position, close to Minjun's right, pouring himself a glass of water like it was any other morning. Minjun was the last to enter. He came in, took his seat at the head of the Kang side, and said nothing for a moment. His chief counsel stood and said there was a change to the morning's agenda. A legal review had been requested before the valuation discussion could proceed. He said the review would be conducted by a member of the Kang legal team, and then he looked toward the door. I walked in. I placed my folder on the table at the front of the room. I looked at the faces looking back at me, board members, attorneys, Madam Choi with her unreadable expression, Ryan with his lazy smile that had not yet realized what it was about to stop doing. "My name is Sira Kang," I said. "I am serving as lead counsel for the Kang family holdings for this review." I paused. "I am also Minjun's wife." The silence was the kind that has texture to it. Madam Choi's face did something I had not expected. It went still, the way something goes still when it receives information larger than what it was prepared for. Ryan's smile took 3 full seconds to understand that it had nowhere left to go. Under the table, Ryan's hand reached for his phone. I presented for 22 minutes. I did not raise my voice once. I walked them through the shell company structure first, the full chain, the layered registrations, the directors, the timeline. I placed the documents in front of them as I spoke, clean copies, page-numbered, cross-referenced. I showed them where the Choi Corporation's real estate assets had been moving and where they had been going. I showed them the valuation discrepancy. Then I opened to the communications section, the messages, the payment records, the instructions that carried Ryan's name. I placed Director Han's page last. I said his name clearly. I showed the 3-year communication record between him and the shell company network, the asset information he had passed across, the timing that had allowed the fraud to be structured around the Kang family's own financial calendar. Ryan had gone the color of old paper. Director Han had not moved in over 5 minutes. Madam Choi was looking at Ryan with an expression I had never seen on a person's face. The expression of someone watching something they spent their whole life building catch fire while they are still holding the match. "These materials," I said, closing my folder, "have already been forwarded to the Financial Supervisory Service and to the Federal Prosecutor's Office. What is happening in this room is not a negotiation. It is a notification." I sat down. In the silence that followed, the door opened and Beek walked in. Beek walked to my end of the table and placed a sealed envelope in front of me. He did not look at Madam Choi. He stood with his hands at his sides and spoke to the room. He had provided a sworn statement to federal authorities the previous evening, he said. In it, he named Ryan as the primary architect of the fraud and described in detail the instructions he had been given over 11 months, including the instruction to photograph me and use the image as a threat. He said he had spent 20 years doing difficult work for people who paid well and asked few questions. He said there was a line he had not known he still had until he crossed it. The photograph sent to my phone had been his line. He had crossed it and had not been able to unknow it. "I am sorry," he said. It was not entirely clear who he meant it for. Perhaps all of us. Perhaps himself. Ryan looked at Beek standing there and pushed his chair back. It scraped loudly against the floor. He looked at his mother, and when he spoke his voice was cracked and desperate. "She knew," he said. "She saw the documents. She approved the structure. She knew everything." The room held its breath. Madame Choi did not speak. She did not look away from her son. She sat with her back perfectly straight and let the words land around her without flinching. Jin-soo, who had been sitting in a chair along the wall since the session began, stood up. He straightened his jacket. He looked at his mother for a long time, long enough for everyone in the room to understand what that look cost him. "I will be speaking with my own attorney," he said. He walked out. The room took a long time to come back to itself. Attorneys conferred in low voices. Two of the Choi's senior board members stood and excused themselves without meeting anyone's eyes. Director Han had still not spoken. He was looking at a fixed point on the table surface with the careful blankness of a man who has decided that if he stays still enough, the room might forget he is in it. Min-jun stood and said, without raising his voice, that he would like to speak with Director Han privately. Two members of his security team appeared at the door. Han stood slowly, like a man whose joints had aged 20 years in the past hour, and walked toward the door without looking at anyone. Madame Choi and I were left sitting at opposite ends of the table. The attorneys were absorbed in their own conversations. For a moment there was nobody between us. She looked at me, not with hostility, but something stripped clean of performance. She looked tired. She looked like a woman who had been managing a very heavy thing for a very long time and had just put it down without meaning to. "He told me you were dangerous," she said quietly. "Director Han. He told me before the trip that you were a threat to the merger." She looked at her hands. "He used what I already suspected about you to point me in the wrong direction. I believed him because it was easier than looking at what was under my own roof." I was quiet for a moment. Then, "Director Han is going to prison for a very long time." She nodded once. "So is my son," she said. Min-jun found me on the terrace outside the conference room an hour later. We stood at the railing and looked at the ocean for a while without speaking. That was something I had always loved about being with him. The silences were never uncomfortable. They were just pauses in a conversation that was always continuing. "What did Han say?" I asked. "He said he had been receiving payments from a competitor of my family for 3 years. The person who first recruited him gave me a name." He paused. "I cannot say it here." He looked out at the water. "It is someone I have known since I was 19 years old. Someone I brought into my inner circle because I trusted them completely." I watched his face move through something large and private. Betrayal looks different on different people. On Min-jun, it looked like a stillness, so deep it was almost like absence. "The fraud was never about the Choi merger," he said. "The merger was the cover. The real target was the foundation." Something cold moved through me. Our foundation. It had been positioned in the legal structure as a corporate asset. If the merger collapsed under the right conditions, it could be seized in the legal fallout. Someone wanted to take the one thing we built that was not about power or money, the one thing that was just for other people. I thought about the land rights case where we had met. The community in Southeast Asia. The families who had gotten their property back because we had found where the paper trail went crooked. "Tell me the name," I said. He said it. I sat down on the nearest chair and looked at the ocean. His uncle. His mother's youngest brother. A man who had resented the Kang family inheritance structure since before Min-jun was old enough to understand what resentment looked like. "Accept his deal," I said after a long moment. Min-jun looked at me. "Whatever he is offering, accept it, but I am writing every single term of the agreement." I paused. "And it will be airtight." A voice from the terrace doorway. We both turned. Madame Choi was standing there, her blazer slightly creased, which was the first time I had ever seen that. She looked at the two of us. "So will I," she said. We left Jeju the following morning. On the flight back, a commercial plane, no private cabin, I sat beside Min-jun for the first time in public, without any pretense of distance. He had his hand over mine on the armrest, and neither of us said anything about it being the first time we had done that where other people could see. When we landed, Saul was waiting at arrivals, but standing 10 feet behind him was a woman holding a paper coffee cup in both hands and a folded document against her chest. Lisa, Min-jun's foundation coordinator in Seoul, the person who had first flagged the foundation's legal vulnerability to me 3 weeks earlier. and someone Ryan had been pressuring for months to hand over internal records. She had refused every time. Her left eye was nearly swollen shut. I did not ask questions. "You are coming with us," I said. Minjun turned to Saul and said 2 words, "Expand security." Lisa got into the car and held her coffee cup with both hands the whole drive. I sat beside her and did not need her to speak. Some things just require someone to move over and make room. 3 days after we returned to Seoul, Ryan was arrested. The charges were financial fraud, witness intimidation, and assault, the last from a formal statement I had given, describing what happened on the plane in detail, with Lisa's and Beek's accounts attached. Director Han was arrested the same morning. His charges were longer. Minjun's uncle's deal held. His confession provided the thread that tied the entire network together, and the foundation's independence had been formally secured as a condition of its terms. I watched the news on my phone at the kitchen table, a mug of tea beside me going cold. What I felt was not the surge of triumph I had imagined for years whenever I thought about a moment like this. It was something quieter and more complete, a slow, deep release, like setting down a weight that had been part of my posture for so long I had stopped knowing it was there. My shoulders dropped. The room felt lighter. On a Thursday evening, Minjun came to find me at my desk. I was working on the foundation's legal restructuring, pulling it out of the corporate asset classification, giving it a clean, independent identity that no merger or proceeding could ever touch again. He sat across from me and said a senior official from the Financial Supervisory Service wanted to meet with both of us the following day. Then he was quiet in a way that told me something else was coming. "My mother called today," he said. "She asked how you were managing. She asked if the foundation work was progressing." He held my eyes. "She asked if there was anything she could do." I thought about Madame Choi standing in the terrace doorway. I thought about the donation she had left at the foundation's first public event under a name that was not her own, sitting in the back row, leaving before the reception. I had not mentioned the donation to Minjun. I had left it where it was. "Tell her thank you," I said. I found out I was pregnant on a Tuesday. I had known for 6 days before I told him. I had been sitting with it, turning it over in the quiet of the mornings before he was awake, thinking about what it meant. Was this a world to bring someone new into? I decided on the 6th day that I was asking the wrong question. The right question was whether this was a life to bring someone new into, and the answer was yes. Completely and without reservation, yes. I told him in the corridor outside his office, which was not the romantic setting I had vaguely imagined. He was coming out of a meeting. I was coming in to drop off a filing. We nearly collided in the doorway, and I just said it. Right there, under fluorescent lighting, with the sound of keyboards from the open office behind the glass. He went very still. I watched his face move through something vast and private, a man who had lost a child once, receiving information his body did not yet know how to process without caution. He put his forehead against mine and stayed there without speaking for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and completely steady. "I will remove every threat in this world before it reaches them," he said. "I have already started." I laughed, a small, real laugh against his shoulder. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face did the thing, the stillness, the focus. "It is him," he said. "The uncle," he answered. I stayed. The call lasted 4 minutes. When he hung up, he told me the full offer. The uncle would give a complete confession, nomming every participant in exchange for reduced sentencing and partial asset protection. Minjun looked at me. "Accept the deal," I said, "but I write every single term." We worked until 2 in the morning, side by side, the city quiet outside the window. At some point, he made tea and set a cup beside my hand without interrupting what I was writing. I did not look up. But I noticed. I always noticed. Our daughter was born on a morning in early spring. Minjun was in the room, no phone, no security detail, nothing between him and the moment. He held her with the specific gentleness of someone who knows exactly what it weighs to love a small, completely defenseless person. He named her Hannah. I had always known that was what her name would be. I sat in that hospital room in the early morning light and thought about the plane, the cream leather seats, the golden light, the hand across my face and the silence that followed, the curtain that shifted. The woman who had been making herself smaller for years, she had been on that plane. She was not in this room. This woman had walked to the head of a conference table and said her name clearly in front of 20 people who had underestimated her. This woman had found every loose thread in every room and followed each one without flinching. Minjun looked up from our daughter's face and found me watching him. He held my eyes, that look I had always had to glance away from. This time I did not look away. Outside, Seoul was waking up, and in a room on the 4th floor of that hospital, something very quiet and very permanent had just settled into place. I had not needed saving. I had never needed saving. I had needed time, and someone willing to step through a curtain and ask if I was hurt before he did anything else in the world. And I had needed, most of all, to remember that the woman who could walk into a room and find every loose thread in under 2 minutes had always been there. She was not new. She was just finally, completely, and irreversibly home. If this story held you from that very first line and kept you here all the way to the end, that is exactly what this channel is built for. Stories like this one. Stories that grip you, move you, and remind you that the most powerful people in any room are not always the loudest ones. I want to know where in the world you are right now. Drop your city, your country, and what time it is where you are in the comments below. I read every single one, and I genuinely love seeing where this community reaches. If you are not subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications, because every single week there is a new story waiting for you. Stories about people who survived, who stood their ground, who claimed the life they actually deserved. You do not want to miss a single one. I will see you in the next story.